All
All
right.
right.
Welcome to
Well,
the Third Perspective podcast. For all of our audio listeners, you're not going to know this, but this is our first video podcast. This will be episode 16. And just a reminder, all of our opinions are our own. I'm Corey, and with me is Such, as always. Such, great to have you back.
thanks a lot, buddy. And it's unfortunate that everyone gets to see our faces now.
Well,
Well,
yeah,
yeah,
I've always
I've
said
always
I've
said
had
I've
a
had
face for radio, but yeah, hopefully
okay.
they'll get to see the expressions that we have, and especially when I'm sneezing or scratching or something. Hopefully, it won't be that bad.
Yeah.
So yeah, for any of our audio listeners, if you're interested in going over and seeing a subpar production of a YouTube podcast, you can always go over and see us on the Third Perspective podcast underscore YT, I believe it is. You'd think I'd done that research prior to starting the podcast, since I've had the YouTube channel for a few months, but those will be up there and you can take a look. And the hope is that if and when we get some guests on here, you can really get that full experience of listening to them and watching them, if that's what you choose, or you can just listen to it audio, not an issue. So, Such, one of the things that I wanted to touch base on today for our episode here was a listener question. And she had a fairly general question, which is, can you talk about embracing the suck? Now, I know what I think about that. I know you have your own opinion on that. And I know there's probably going to be some listeners who have never heard that before. And it's a foreign concept, or it's something that they attribute to, such as being popular among military personnel. So that's, I know, mid to early 2000s, there was a book that was put out regarding the Gulf War, which was entitled "Embracing the Suck." So naturally, it's going to come out about military personnel. But it's funny because when I was doing the research for this, a very simplistic way of putting this was leaning into the pain, is what they were saying. And it's the idea of being emotionally comfortable while being physically uncomfortable. What are your thoughts on that?
I think a lot of people talk about this concept nowadays in different terms, right? So when I hear embrace the suck, I hear um, seek out challenges, chase adversity, um, things that if you engage in it through that challenge and trying to think about how to overcome the challenge, you generally learn something. So I
Right.
think to me, that's what embracing the suck is. Yeah, it's not pleasant because, you use the word suck. Well, suck sounds sucky, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Embracing it means to engage with it. And I remember when I used to bodybuild a long time ago, um, you're hungry a lot of times because you're, on a diet to a certain degree, trying to get leaner. And I remember always saying to myself, embrace the hunger. Same idea.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's funny
funny
enough. I
enough, I
had
had
a secondary portion to that, which is somebody likened it to a Buddhist philosophy. So something sort of, as you said, Buddhism often is about acceptance,
acceptance,
peace,
peace,
but
but also
also suffering that happens in day-to-day life. But they said the idea is that we need to reduce our own expectations in life and embrace the reality of what is happening to us. And initially I sort of read that and I thought, oh, it sounds crappy. Like I have to reduce my own expectations. But when I was
when I was
thinking about
thinking
it,
about it,
we
we often
often, I don't know if it's we overpromise what we are thinking our life is going to be, but it's this idea that if we haven't achieved 1,000% of what we have set out to do, that somehow we failed. Somehow our life is less than what it is. And rather than simply looking at what
looking at
we
what we
do
do
have around us and making that the best, embracing the suck that's around us rather than it being a negative thing, leaning into it and making it better and therefore making our life better. I might not have explained that very well, but it's interesting what it is. Just the fact that when I first read it, I thought, I don't want to reduce my expectations on my life. Like, why am I going to set limits on myself by immediately reducing the expectations? But I know I'm never going to be an astronaut. I know I'm never going to, live to be the oldest person, out there. Um, me lowering my expectations to understand that those aren't going to be goals that I can achieve doesn't mean that I can't achieve very fantastic goals. It's just understanding that I'm not living that life, if that makes any sense.
It does. uh, um, Maybe those challenges or goals aren't what's meant for you, anyways, right?
Hmm.
So, like, yeah, of course, maybe I'm never going to be an astronaut, but if I wanted to be, I could,
Hmm.
right? So it's a matter of thinking. At least for me, when I hear that, I like setting goals, and I understand not creating too many expectations because you want to live in the moment of what you're trying to achieve. So, say for example, a couple years ago, I set a goal to break the record to run across Canada. And again,
Right.
that expectation is like a crazy expectation because I wasn't a runner and I didn't do any of the things that would be related to anyone that would be wanting to achieve that thing. So I set an expectation, but then through the expectation of that thing, I set smaller goals. Within those smaller goals, I have to be real in it. So let's see if I can explain that better. So the expectation is to do the thing, run across
Hmm.
Canada, break a record. Okay. Now, what makes it real? What makes it more achievable? Okay. When I set that goal, I put a 5-year timeline on it. Now it's possible. Now it's achievable. So the expectation has to be real. You have to have a real like an understanding of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And if it's something way out of, like, I want to be an astronaut, okay, well, now I have to set a timeline of 20 years. And if I set a timeline of, or whatever the amount of time is, whatever it is, and then I can execute against that goal every single day. So I think I might disagree a little bit with what you're saying in the sense that, oh,
Hmm.
I'll never be that thing. The question is, do you want to be that thing? And if you do want to be that thing, let's figure it out and create an expectation that makes it real, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably one of the issues that I've done is I've leaned away from embracing the suck and focusing on that one portion of, again, this Buddhist philosophy of embracing the suck, which is to reduce our expectation. But more so, I think what it is embracing the reality of what is happening to us. So I'll often point out that, in my job, I'm outside, I'm doing things usually not planned, usually in a situation that I have no control over. So something as simple as I'm standing out in the rain. I'd love to be standing in a place where I'm not getting rained on. I would love to not be outside right now because it's, raining, it's about zero, it sucks. I can sit there and I can complain about it and I can grumble about it and I can make this the worst day possible. Or I can simply just embrace the reality of what's happening and realize I'm not going to get any more wet. I'm as wet as I'm going to get. This is not going to get any more wet. I'm going to lean into the pain and be happy that I'm outside and I get to be rained on.
Yep.
As silly as that sounds, but to me,
No.
that's a small portion of embracing the suck. It's that idea of embracing the reality of what is happening to us right now, not the fact that if I'd done better in school, I wouldn't have gotten this job, and now I wouldn't be standing out
Right.
here, and I should be an astronaut.
Well, on that point, so let's take that example to another level, maybe. So yeah, it sucks. You're in the rain. It's cold. Embrace it. This is what your reality in the moment. But then you can also, and this is what I've kind of started trying to do, try to find a way to make that even better. So, for example, I'm outside in the cold and the rain. Actually, perfect example. Yesterday, I went out for an 80-minute run and it was hissing out, man. It was cold. And it was like 6 degrees right on the beach in White Rock, and the wind was hitting me hard. And like it was unpleasant.
Mhm.
And it wasn't a fun experience until I framed it differently. So yeah, I'm wet. I'm getting wet. Okay, that part I already the first step is being okay with the reality of you getting wet. That's step one. Step two is, how do I amplify this to make me better? So for me, in that moment, I'm thinking about, if I embrace the suck of this rain and I'm running through it and I'm getting cold, I know that it's making me stronger mentally.
Mhm.
So for me, that's kind of what I try to do. I try to not only embrace the suck, but now how do I find a way to make me like it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, there was another point that I wanted to touch on, which I think you've basically summed up, is we cannot control everything that happens to us, but we can control how we react to it. And I'm guilty of allowing things to dictate how I react to them. And I know that sounds stupid. Well, what else would you do? But if I'm having a bad day and something bad happens, it can be minor, but I'm just like, yep, here we go. Here's a second or a third or a 20th thing that's happened to me today. This is obviously going to be a bad day. Not looking at the fact that it's a minor thing, it's a small thing. It really has no impact on my day whatsoever. But if I don't acknowledge the fact that I have control over how I react to things, then I'm just stuck with I can't control anything and I feel powerless. And as I'm sure some of our listeners do, you get that point where sometimes that minute, that day can turn into a week, can turn into a couple of weeks, can turn into a lifetime.
Well, really, really thinking about going back to that running example from yesterday, learning a way to enjoy it and appreciate it is another way of like creating a pattern interrupt in the brain so that you're not going down that spiral of negativity. Like, oh man, this day sucks. And then, oh, I can't catch a break. Oh, this thing's happening to me. Life sucks. Like all the things. And, a lot of people are like that. And I was one of those guys for sure. I can't catch a break. I can't catch a break. And then then actually another story. These things that keep popping in my head. I was
Yeah,
going
keep
through
them
my
coming.
yeah, I was going through a divorce, right? And a few years ago, and I was speaking to my ex-father-in-law because we had a good relationship. And anyway, so I was talking to him a few years ago while I was going through the divorce, and I was like whining and complaining, being a big baby, to be honest. And I was saying, man, I can't catch a break. And he said something that still stuck with me. He's like, you create your breaks. You make your
Mm,
breaks happen. And I didn't understand what he meant at the time because I was in my own head. But now
yeah.
I totally understand what it means. You create how you feel from that stimulus, like how you interpret that thing is how you will feel. So if you can frame things, find something, a silver lining, like people say, oh, find that silver lining. Sure, find the silver lining, but amplify that silver lining. Make it more, make it bigger rather than, oh, I just see a lining. Well, how do I amplify it? So um I think that's a tool that, people can use. I mean, shoot, man, it's helped me finding other ways to amplify that silver lining.
So, to our listeners, what would be your advice? So, somebody, obviously, we both have shared friends, tier one operators, those who are at top of their field, sort of thing, and we get a lot of advice from them. Obviously, you've been on some podcasts about one particular individual helping you, but when we're not that tier one operator, how are we making the most of that silver lining? So, for our listeners who are sitting there, just like, I don't know, I'm just an average Joe or Joette. I'm not sure what the female version of the Joe
Jill,
would be.
Jill, Jill.
Jill, there we go. Learning stuff every day here. But for the average Joe or Jill that's out there, how are they going to amplify that silver lining?
Well, like any new skill, it takes time to cultivate and get better at. So I think if there's a skill that you already have, let's say if you're already kind of disciplined in one certain type of area,
Hmm.
be it, and some people might say, oh, I'm not disciplined. Well, everyone has a level of discipline. You brush your teeth every single day, you take a shower every single day, you make food every single day. Those are discipline type of acts. You wouldn't, well, maybe the food part isn't, but the brushing your teeth is, and taking showers are. So
Yeah.
if you can take that skill set, as small as it is, put it somewhere to start. You may not get, or you may not initially be where I am. And because I've been working hard at it for 3 years nonstop every single day. So at the beginning, I was that. Like I was, how do I create the silver line? How do I do this, that, and the other? And one of it is by talking to friends that might have more experience or knowledge, but not everybody I've spoken to is a tier one operator. There have been all kinds of people, right? Like, I mean, there have been people that have been at the gym or a trainer or a counselor or a freaking coffee shop person. Somebody's got something that I can glean information from.
Mhm.
So for me, I think to answer your question, how do you someone just starting out to find a way to amplify it is be intentional and think about how to amplify it. Now, it might not happen overnight, but if you're intentionally thinking about how to amplify that silver lining, you will. And so, how do you do that? Well, every opportunity that you have that something sucks, you think about it. Now, if you're in a negative spot, that'll be all day, every day, because everything
Yeah.
sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So, you got a
Yeah.
lot of practice.
Interesting. Like you use the word intentional, and I think that's a very important thing. My little idioms in the past have been, if you're going to take time to make scrambled eggs, be there, be present. Don't be thinking about 7 other things that you have to do, and make them the best eggs you can. That doesn't mean you have to be a chef. It doesn't mean you have to add 1,000 spices. But if you're going to take the time out of your day to make those eggs, make those eggs. If you're going to take time to read a book, sit down and read that book. Don't be worrying that you should be doing laundry or the place is a mess. If you're going to take time, be intentional in what you're doing. And by doing that, you're leaning into whatever it is. It doesn't have to. I know earlier I said lean into the pain for embracing the suck, but just from, like you said, taking and amplifying that silver lining. If you're going to do something, be intentional about it. Don't do it in the background. Don't do it as an afterthought. Because what's the point? You know, if
Yeah.
I'm not talking about, doing laundry. You can be the best damn laundry doer in on the planet, but it's if it's going to be something that you're going to take away from valuable time that you have in the day, be intentional about it. And I think that ties back into our idea of embracing the suck and leaning into the pain. If something's going to suck, don't avoid it. Be intentional with it,
Yeah,
right?
and I agree, and I think, um, I guess to start, if someone's having trouble figuring out how to do that, there's got to be something that you're passionate about. And
Mhm.
if there's something that you're passionate about, maybe it's a bit easier to start that amplification of that silver lining because you're passionate about that thing. So going back to, the eggs or whatever, I like coffee. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for me, I like to be somewhat passionate about it because I like it. And most law enforcement, first responders like coffee because it keeps them awake and they
Mhm.
drink it for the caffeine. And I was very much like that when I would go on shift. You get your morning coffee break, your afternoon coffee break, whatever it is, and you're doing the coffee. But when I started becoming more intentional about coffee, well, it changed the experience altogether because
Mm.
I'm thinking about my coffee now. I'm not just going to a Tim's or a Starbucks and get me whatever. I'm thinking about, okay, now I'm going to make my coffee in the morning. And now I'm going to think about what coffee I'm drinking. And now I'm going to properly weigh out all my, my grams and the water and where is this coffee coming from. And I'm only doing that because I'm passionate about it. If I'm not passionate, I won't care. And I'll be like, give me my coffee. So just as a starting point, if you like something and you're passionate about something, dive deeper into it. And then you can start figuring out how to create silver linings all over the place. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads up actually to a question I was going to have. And obviously we'll touch base a little bit more on embracing the suck because we've kind of just sort of skimmed the surface on it. But what are some of the daily things to embrace the suck can we do um, that still allows us to push our limits farther than what we normally have? So I'm not talking about like, I know for you in 2025, you're looking at running across Canada. Obviously, most of our listeners, that is not a realistic goal for them. It's not that they can't accomplish it; it's just not a realistic goal for whatever reason. What are some of the things that in a day to day normal life for most people can be classified as embracing the suck and pushing their own limits? What do you think?
So I think if you're tired and you're going in on a night shift and you're exhausted, I mean, that's kind of sucky.
Mhm.
And it doesn't feel good when you're exhausted to go on your third or fourth night and it's your last night or whatever it is to go in and grind it out. So that sucks. Embracing it, at least at the very least, you go into that environment maybe if it's still sucky for you, but you're a bit more positive, your partner is not feeling as crappy then. Because then,
Mhm.
you go in and if you're whining and complaining, "Oh, I'm tired," or "I'm tired," or "I'm tired," well, now your partner is feeling it too, man. And how crappy is that? Now you're feeling that someone else is feeling it. So if you can embrace the suck, maybe not for yourself, but maybe for someone else, that's also a good starting point. At least for me, it was. Because I used to go to shift and I'd be like, "Man, I'm bagged. Oh man, I'm bagged." And you can kind of see how it affects people around you. And if you're able to shift that, even man, even if you have to fake it a bit, and if even if you are exhausted, if you tell yourself something different over a period of time, it starts shifting. And so maybe that's one way people can kind of embrace the suck that is more realistic. At least they can at least relate to that to a certain degree.
Yeah, for me, it's the snooze button. I know that sounds kind of strange, but um, setting my alarm early, for a day shift, for instance, I'm up 4:30, and not a big deal if you're doing it all the time, but on shift work, man, that
Mm.
sucks doing that switch. So for me, I noticed real benefits when I stopped hitting the snooze. When the alarm went off, I immediately flung my legs out of bed and embraced the suck of getting up and doing the day. And I know it's such a small thing, but then I was already past the toughest part of the day, which was waking up. If I did it without almost even thinking and just got up right away, I was already halfway to the, bathroom before I started waking up and I realized, oh, I've started my day. This is fine. And like you said, and being intentional in everything that we're doing. But
But
you'll
you'll
find
find
that
that
if
if
you
you
do
do
that at
that.
the beginning and you get those done and you're not hitting the snooze anymore, then it flows into, oh, that's interesting. I've got an extra 10 or 15 minutes in the morning and you get to work 10 or 15 minutes early. What does that mean? Does it mean you get a shower? Does it mean, I don't know, you do 10 minutes of cardio for small attainable goals? And it's those things about embracing the suck where if you sit there and you think about it too long, you're probably not going to do it. Whereas if you just do it, you're already halfway done it by the time you realize you're doing it.
Yeah, I guess the real question is how do you get someone like for you, what got you to set that alarm earlier to begin with? Right?
To
And
be
what
better.
okay, so for sure. And so I think everyone's different, whatever that reason is to get up the bit earlier. Someone might not even think that. Someone will be like, how do I get myself to get up that much earlier? And if it's as simple as like you get an extra 15 minutes on your coffee break or you get an extra 15 minutes on your lunch break, whatever it is, find the thing that's going to help you do something that you're not normally already doing. And there are infinite number of ways to find that. It's just dependent on the individual who's seeking it out.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've found is after major life events, I will be all for embracing the suck. Like that is, I almost turn it into an identity, which you can't really do because anybody outside of Goggins, is going to turn that into an identity, right? And the problem is eventually the motivation that you have, if you're making it everything you are, is gonna wane. Whatever the fear is, whatever the promise you made, whatever it is, it starts to wane and it crumbles. And full disclosure, I have not been embracing the suck recently. And I've had a bit of change that I'm, a different change at work, trying to get adjusted to a different schedule and things like that. And I have flat out noticed I am not doing what I need to do. I'm not embracing the suck. I am literally seeking comfort. And that happens. I can be a hard charger for 2, 3 years and then fall off the bandwagon as it was. So
So
that's a
that's
question for you. How does someone who's at their limit even waking up, they used to be a hard charger. They used to embrace the suck. They used to take things in stride. And now it seems like everything is monumental. How do we, if we're at that point, like I'm sure some of our listeners are, how do
how do
we
we
embrace the
embrace the
suck
suck
in
in?
that position? Like where we're not looking at running a marathon, we're not looking at, becoming the healthiest we ever have. How do we do that?
I mean, my question is then is what's gotten okay. Why is the person in the state to begin with? So are they struggling with something? Are they suffering from depression? Are they because that changes the answer, right? Like if
Mhm.
are they just you know, so let's say for example it's due to mental health reasons. Let's say it's due to severe depression or something and they really find it a challenge to just get out of bed. How do you do it? It's a good question, man. It's a tough one because I and I don't know if there's a simple answer for that. I think I know what I did, and for me, I found something that I was relatively, I wouldn't even say good at. I found something that I can sink my teeth into.
Mhm.
I found something that I can occupy myself with, so that I can at least push the needle in a positive direction, even if it's a millimeter. So you almost got to look at the small things. I mean, look, I'm training to do something, very challenging, but I wasn't always here. I had to start somewhere. And I started pretty much at the very, very beginning. And I was struggling to get out of bed, man. I
Mhm.
was
Mhm.
struggling to just go for a run. I was struggling for all these things. So for me, it was um finding something small enough that I wasn't intimidated by and sinking my teeth into that. Whether that be like if you're someone who's an avid reader or really into literature and maybe you want to write a story, maybe you want to write in your journal, maybe you want to just start writing something to get you out of the ditch, to get your teeth into something.
Right.
Whatever that is, I think for that is a very, or actually, let's take it a step back even. Understand it's going to be a process too. Understand it's going to take time. So don't even, because if you were to say like, oh, you got to do these things by a certain period of time or get out of a ditch by a certain period of time, it can get daunting, man. So
Yeah,
if,
it's the New Year's Eve resolution dilemma, right?
right. So as long as you're just understanding that things take time, and as long as you're taking, even if it's a small step forward, it's a step forward. And try to take those steps. If I mean, I'm hope I'm articulating this well enough. I'm not sure if I am, man.
Yeah, no, I think you're doing really well. I think the point of a small step is important. And the reason is because if somebody's at capacity, so, we've talked about capacity before, but if somebody's at max capacity for whatever it is that they're dealing with, whether or not it's stuff in their life, a mental health challenge, physical challenge,
Yeah.
fill in the
Fill in
blank
the
of
blank.
whatever you're dealing with. If you're getting out of bed and you're doing the things that you need to do, and they can be basic, you're embracing the suck because what is the alternative? You stay in bed. So if you're getting up and you're doing stuff, you're embracing the suck and you're pushing your limits every day that you do that. So you think, well, all I'm doing is getting up and brushing my teeth, or I fed myself today, or I'm working through this physical injury. Why is that embracing the suck? And it's because every day you do it, it's another day. That's a PR, right? It's a personal best. Great. I got up every day, 7 days a week this week, did what I needed to do, and went to bed, and I didn't stay in bed. That's embracing the suck. For you, that's your suck. And
Hmm.
if you start in sort of measuring your suck to somebody else, you end up getting caught in this like OODA loop that ends up happening that, well, their suck is worse. So my suck can't be as bad. And if my suck isn't as bad, then why am I having such a problem with it? And if I'm having such a problem with it, then it's obviously me, and it just keeps
Yeah.
rotating and rotating.
I think a very helpful thing is to ignore all that. Just focus on what you're trying to achieve, the individual themselves. And yeah, it's hard to not compare yourself to others, but people got to understand is an individual and other people's experiences are other people's experiences, and so you can't even like you're comparing apples and oranges, like you're not
Mhm.
comparing apples and apples, so it's a very different thing. And I want to go back to the small wins, and I think, I mean, some small wins, that's what I'm gonna say. um,
Yep.
the small sort of discipline things like brushing your teeth or getting up in the morning and getting out of bed, and that you also need to be intentional and observant to the small wins that you're getting too, because that'll reinforce that you're on the right path and you're getting those dopamine hits so that okay, continue moving forward. So let's say, for example, you're having difficulty getting out of bed. Okay, well, now you're getting out of bed and now you're doing your day, even though it's a grind. Okay, well, how about we add one more thing next week? Get out of bed and now make it. Now you make your bed for the whole week.
Mhm.
That's a bit of a win. Now you're making your bed every single day and you're getting up. Awesome. Now we're going to add one more thing the week after. And it doesn't have to be crazy, man. Like whatever is a win for you. Making my bed when I was kind of dealing with my own stuff was a big deal.
Yeah.
for me. So and I started, like I said to me, I'm making my bed every single day, and I
Yeah.
got a win out of that. Like I
Yeah.
never used to really do it. My ex-wife would do it, or I never did. Only when I only made my bed when I had to in my life most of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Now, for me, that was a win a couple years ago when I started making my own bed. I was like, man, I'm making my own bed, and it kind of made me feel good. And I had a messy place, man. I wasn't like, when you're far in depression, your place is gonna be a hot mess. At least it was.
Yeah.
Mine was.
Yeah.
So I started getting wins when I would just vacuum. That would be a small win for me, man. Or clean the washroom, or even like little things, just whatever that little thing was, I would acknowledge it as a win. And those things helped propel me forward.
Yeah, it's interesting, when you say making your bed being a win, and full disclosure, I was, looking it up even though I've actually read it, but Admiral McRaven, literally made a book saying, "Make your bed," and there's a famous speech on YouTube where he talks about it, where he's addressing a graduating, university class, and he says, "At the end of the day, no matter what, you come home to a made bed."
Mhm. It's
So
awesome.
the rest of your day can just be absolute garbage, but at the very least, you started it off with a made bed and you came home to a made bed. And it's amazing that those small wins stack up when you're embracing the suck. And again,
Especially when you
we
yeah, sorry, but especially when you weren't doing them ever.
yeah,
So that's a PR.
yeah. And like we said, you can't control everything that happens to you. So I can't control what my day is going to be like. Like I can't control as in what is going to happen to me. But at the end of the day, I come home and well, I made my bed. It's fantastic. So obviously we've got our small wins and embracing the suck for sort of the average listener out there. But to sort of bump it up a notch, what about those that are already making their bed? They're already got a bunch of small wins. Um, what are they doing to embrace the suck? So I sort of see this as you. You're on a bigger path now. You've sort of accomplished the brushing your teeth and showering thing. And now you've got long-term goals. You're embracing the suck. You're doing what you need to do in order to push that forward. What's the next step from an average listener to somebody who's like, you know what? I'm going to the gym, I'm doing everything I can, my relationships are good. What do I need to do to really lean into the pain to be better? Because when I think of embracing the suck, I think of pushing our self-defined limits that we've put on ourselves because nobody's going to be tougher than me on me. But I go, nah, I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm probably only going to be do this and I'm going to knock it back about a quarter to make sure that I accomplish that. So
Mm.
how am I breaking through those limits when it's just me pushing myself and embracing the suck?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's an important question. I think so. We're basically starting off at a point of, okay, now we're just normal. We're just kind of going along our day and we're fine. Everything's good to go. Now is the time where people should be setting goals that they don't think they can achieve. So if you're passionate about something, whatever that thing is, set a goal that you don't think you can achieve, but if you put all your effort into it, maybe you can get close to it. So I have a bit of an opposite way of looking at it than what you just framed just now, where you're going to
Mm,
set a goal and then set the standard maybe a little bit lower so that you can maybe achieve that goal so you feel good about it. I don't really do that. I set the goal so high that if I
mhm,
don't even get it, it's still pretty good, if that makes sense. So for example, I'm setting a goal to break the record to run across Canada. That's 110 kilometers every single day for 66 days of running. I have
oof.
no idea. I have no idea I can do that. I have no clue because I've never attempted it. But I'm going to train my butt off over this year and next year to see if I can. But the reality, let's say worst case scenario, I don't. But maybe I get to 80K a day.
Mhm.
Well, we've still accomplished something because the process of trying to get to running 110K a day is I'm still learning. I'm still figuring out how to do that thing. I'm still engaging with people. I'm still raising money. I'm still figuring out how to network. I'm still all dot 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 whatever it is. So to execute a massive goal, you have to do many 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 things, and through that process, the journey, you become something entirely different. So if you set your goal too low, you will never ever see what you're meant to be, and you will
Mm,
never see what you're capable of. Full stop. So let's say, for example, you want to start jujitsu and you're whatever, let's say a blue belt, you just started a couple years in, I don't want to compete. There's no reason for me to compete. And whatever the reasons are. But what people don't understand, whoever does jujitsu or any sort of competitive sport, football, soccer, whatever it is,
Mhm.
and you never compete in that, you'll never see what your true potential is in that thing because you're not testing yourself.
Right.
So when whenever I hang out with people in jujitsu or whatever, and not that I'm a master, I'm a blue belt. I've only been training for 6 years, and I should probably be a lot higher than I am, but whatever. Point is this: um, I used to compete all the time, and through the act of competing, I got better because I
Mhm.
was the intensity that's associated with competing to leading up to a competition is higher than just going in as a beer league kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
so the intensity is higher, so I'm learning more. And then after the tournament, all the errors or mistakes or things that I could have done better, now you reflect on those and improve on it. So the timeline of improvement is far shorter than someone who's just going day to day without intentionality. Competition breeds intentional perspective. It pushes you to be more intentional in what you're doing. So, um, yeah. Did I even answer a question? I don't know. I just go on
Yeah,
tangents.
I think so, and it was interesting when you were talking about, pushing yourself, and I was thinking about the fact that a crucible hardens metal, you know what I mean? And there's often points where even in my, first responder career where I thought, "Oh, yeah, if this ever happens, I'll do this or I'll utilize this," and I get into it, and it's a big dust up and I go, none of that worked. Not only did none of that work, but even where I had tools on my belt, that was a horrible place to put it. Like that just wasn't good. But it wasn't until I got into that position where I was in a crucible where it was testing me that I realized this doesn't work. This is useless. There's no point in even um, focusing on this. This is the part that I need to focus on if I'm dealing with this situation again. Obviously, never's and always. But the fact that I also think of like my wife has run quite a few half marathons and a marathon, but when she was training for a marathon, um, before she even ran the marathon, she was already running past marathon distances.
Mhm.
Coming up and to that training. So for her to run the marathon at that point was already an inevitability, unless there was something out of her control happened. She'd done the work, but that just goes to show you that the limits that we put on ourselves are self-imposed. If you say, I'm gonna have you run a marathon and you only ever run up to that distance of running a marathon, you won't know you'd be able to do 22 in 22 days, right? You
Mhm.
think that's it. That's the goal. That's as far as I'm gonna go. I ran a marathon. I put the trophy up or the medal up on the wall and wow, I tell my grandkids at one time I ran a marathon. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, those are perishable, right? Like, I mean, they come and go. And I have medals. I put them up for one reason only. I put them up so my daughter, who's 6 years old, can see that they're medals, so she can ask me a question, and then I can talk to her about it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have anything up because to me, it doesn't really matter much. I don't really care about the medal. Um, I care about what the medal does for me is like a photograph. It's a timestamp of who I was at that time and what I learned to get that medal and what I need to continue to learn for the next one. So I mean, for me, medals and trophies are mm, meaningless to me.
Mhm.
It's more about what do we because especially they'd be even more meaningless to me if I only did one marathon 20 years ago. I would be like, why do I even have like I rest it's funny. I talk to people often. I was at my daughter's soccer practice and I was talking to one of the dads and he's talking about how 30 years ago he used to do this, that, and the other. And I asked him what he does now. And by optics, clearly not much. And
Mhm.
so for me, it's not about what I did 30 years ago because I could talk about when I was a wrestler in high school, man. Like I wrestled for 4 years. I mean,
Yeah.
that was 30 years ago. I'm not a wrestler anymore. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's. I mean, I still kind of understand the skills because I can apply them to a certain degree in jujitsu. But if I wasn't doing all the things that I was doing, that 4 years of high school wrestling doesn't mean squat. You got to kind of continue building your skills. It's like saying, okay, I was hey, there's a RCMP member that retired 25 years ago. He can be a cop still, right?
Yeah.
No, he can't, or she
Yeah.
can't, because everything is different. Everything is different. So how can you be the same? You got to constantly be in the game, just like doctors. If you're a GP, GPs don't really know much unless they continually educate themselves over and over again to understand what's happening from a medical perspective now. So you have to constantly be re-educating yourself. In computer sciences, people who are engineers have to continually advance their skill sets all the time. So there's no difference between physical activity or any sort of skills that you're trying to learn. You have to, I think you have to continually engage in the things that you want to improve on if you want to get better. And if you're not doing that, well, maybe start thinking about it.
And put yourself in the crucible, right?
100%, man.
It's
And it's so good.
so it's funny because actually the listener that brought up this question about talk, or more of the statement, which was talk about embracing the suck. I know her personally, and I know the beast that she is physically, and the self not imposed limits, but almost the stubbornness to never settle for what's good enough. Now, there is a conversation in there about perhaps listening to yourself and not just constantly crushing your body and your mind in order to accomplish things, and being conscious of that. Not that I'm accusing her of that, but if somebody says they're going to run 20K, she's going to run 25. It's just because that's what she expects from herself. But maybe on the personal side of things, maybe she's not embracing the suck as much. And that's not a judgment on her, but I think she has control over the physical stuff, but maybe not the more personal stuff. So how do we translate the physical side of things? I know we've talked about, the small things, but she doesn't have problems with that. How do we translate the commitment and intentionality that we put into physical things into maybe, like you said, the more mental, emotional, intellectual side of things in order to embrace that suck?
Yeah, I guess for me, I look at the physical as a mental. I don't look at it as a physical thing. I just look at the physical act as a tool to create more mental capacity. So, okay, so to answer that, so for me, I can relate to your friend about the 20 kilometers going 25.
Mhm.
So I can relate to that 100%. And I think what that is, okay, yeah, we have the physical thing kind of squared away. So for me, really over the last 2 or 3 years hasn't been so much focused on how do I, become a better runner, which it has been. I've been applying skills in different. I wanted to learn how to communicate better with people. I wanted
Mm.
to understand how to regulate my emotions better. I wanted to understand how to go out into public environments and not be um, sitting in a corner and not really engaging with people. So,
Right.
so for me, really, the last few years has been a focus of how to be a better person, not physically, but all the other aspects. And I've used physical things to help improve that. But I had to be intentional and understand that I had and be honest with myself and own the things that I wasn't very good at, which are a lot, and intentionally want to improve those things, and then started getting to work to improve them. So how did I do
Mhm.
that? Well, um, I was not very good at communicating. And if someone disagreed with me, I'd get very angry, and it would be a challenge to properly have a conversation with that person without obviously showing how I was responding. It would be very evident as to how I was feeling.
Mhm.
So I wanted to improve those things. So how did I improve those? I had to start small, man. I started communicating with people that I probably wouldn't have ever talked to before. So I recognized how I was, and I was like, oh, this type of person I probably wouldn't talk to. Let me go talk to them
Mhm.
and sit down and talk to them and force myself to do it.
It's
And
like not hitting the snooze button.
exactly. So I would force myself to do that. And then I would go to coffee shops and sit there and just strike up conversations so I could learn. And man, I was terrible at it. I was
Mhm.
terrible at it. People were like, what are you talking to me for? Or like whatever it is. But I was trying to find ways. And part of me going to, like, a buddy of mine, Seb Lavoie, does these mental health walks on every other Sunday,
Yeah.
with a group of people. And part of my process was going to that a couple years ago when he first started them. I purposely went there because I didn't think I would be able to relate with any of those people, and I would judge them based on the type of people that they were. So I recognized that I would do those types of things. So I forced myself to go there so I could learn about them and understand them and connect. So putting myself in environments that are uncomfortable, running outside for 2 hours isn't the uncomfortable part.
Mhm.
Understanding myself as a person, what's uncomfortable for me, and I focused on those things. So, okay, number one, communicate with people. Number two, get better at speaking in public. Well, how do I do that, man? Okay, hit up every single person I possibly can who would want to talk to me on a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Honestly, man, honestly, I was cold calling people to get on podcast, maybe 100. Like, and half the people that are jumping on some podcast now is because I started it. I started on some of them first, right?
Mhm.
And then they kind of proliferated through that. So for me, reflecting back on me trying to improve myself in areas that I wasn't good at, now I have the luxury of hindsight to see that other people have been improved upon that sort of path as well because I engaged it. And so it allows me to, it encourages me to do it even more because I can see the benefits not only for me but for others that are um, seeing benefit.
Funny thing that I did, probably about 15 years ago, and it was probably the most successful I've ever had to challenging my own limits. And actually, surprisingly, the way I met my current wife, was if I ever wanted to say no in a particular situation, I automatically said yes. And I'm not talking about things that are unsafe or whatnot,
Sure.
but stand up and sing in front of a group of people that I don't know? Absolutely not. Okay, I'm going up and doing that. And it wasn't the minute I thought no, I would say yes and I would go do it. And the minute that I felt uncomfortable about doing something because I wasn't good enough to do it or didn't think I'd be good at it, I said yes. And it was funny because it was just one after the other, after the other, after the other. And before I knew it, daily, all I was doing was challenging myself. So that became the norm. It was, it's not a challenge. I got to find the challenge in that. What is that? And every day I kept testing myself and testing myself and testing myself. But I took me out of the equation because if I thought no, I said immediately yes. And then I didn't hit the snooze. I got out of bed. And before I knew it, I was already doing the thing that I thought was challenging. So for me, just even by proxy, I was embracing the suck, as it were. And again, we're not talking about standing out in the rain. That's an entirely different conversation that I love to touch base on and sort of focus on in the next one here. But we've gone a
I
bit long
actually,
today.
I got one
Oh,
more point on this though that I think might
giver.
relate to some, and it just hit me now. So, and for those of who may be working in law enforcement or with CBSA or whatever, I can give an explanation that I dealt with at the workplace that was very specific to this. And,
Sure.
and a number of years ago, CBSA, um, immigration and customs, were two different sort of skill sets that officers would have. And there's different legislation for each of them, Immigration Act and then Customs Act, and you can enforce certain types of things through those pieces of legislation. But after 9/11, the agency started integrating those things and different ministries and all that kind of stuff. So around 2005, 6, 7, 8, and around there, CBSA integrated immigration, customs, and agriculture, so that one officer can do all the jobs. Right.
Mm.
So as you
Mhm.
can imagine, that would be very challenging because now you're trying to enforce over 160 acts of parliament. So it was very intimidating to me. So I started as a customs officer, and when we integrated, they started letting us know, hey, you got to start doing immigration. I was like, what? Immigration to me was a whole bunch of gray. Whereas customs is black and white. You either have it or you don't. Okay, you're getting arrested or you're not, or you're getting, whatever. It's getting seized or it's not. It's very black and
Mhm.
white. Whereas immigration, now it's very gray and it's interpreted through the person that's reading the piece of legislation sometimes. So for me, I was so intimidated. I was like, I can't do this, man. I don't want to do it, because also the paperwork and documentation and applications that you're using are far different. So you have to learn a whole new computer system and a whole new type of paperwork that you have to do. And it's like very daunting and very challenging. So I remember, man, I would be working and I'd be like, okay, I don't want to do that. And I would avoid it. I would like, okay, I got to go to the washroom, or I got to do this, or whatever it was. And then I got to a point where it's like, man, I got to learn this. So then I started volunteering to do things that I had no clue how to do. I was like, okay, just put me there. I'll figure it out. And then I would push myself into environments that I had to learn it, and then I had to action it or enforce it. So it forced me to learn how to do it properly. And I sucked at it for at least 2 years.
Yeah.
It got to the third year when I started feeling comfortable in applying the act. And so, anyways, my point is, you can do that with anything that you know that you're not good at. Force yourself, and it was very uncomfortable when I started. Very uncomfortable, because I didn't trust myself. I didn't understand. Like, when you're arresting somebody, you have to understand the legislation and the authority that you have. And at the time, I didn't understand the authority I had under the Immigration Act. So that provided a level of insecurity and lack of confidence when I'm engaging with someone that I may have to refuse entry to the country. So, that dynamic is very challenging. But having said that, I dove deep like many other people have, or did during that time. But I think for me, it felt even more challenging because I felt so insecure. Anyways, the point being is I dove deep, and I embraced the suck when it came to legislation.
You recognize what you were lacking at. You physically and intentionally sought it out in order to get better.
Yeah.
Awesome. Like I was saying, we've gone a bit long today. Hopefully, if you've made it this far, thanks very much. We appreciate it. Let us know what you think of the new length. I'd love to touch base more on more specifics of embracing the suck, because again, I think it was just a very minor sort of tangent we went down in regards to it. But I'd love to touch base again. Any final thoughts?
No, no final thoughts. I might have a final thought, but if anyone has any questions on embracing the suck, or even your experiences of embracing the suck, like, throw us a comment either on the Third Perspective IG account, or when this goes up on YouTube, maybe throw a comment there, because we'd like to be able to engage with some people to get their perspective on what embracing the suck is to them, and so we can further understand how to service you guys, or even how you can help us understand how to embrace the suck even better.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. I think when people have their stories and their experiences, we all grow together. And again, touch base with us on our Instagram account, Third Perspective Podcast, or our website, thirdperspectivepodcast.com, or you can email us. All the contact stuff is on our website. Feel free to send us a message, and we love receiving them. We love reading them, and we'll get to them at a later podcast. We'll let you know when that is. Any other further thoughts, Zach?
No, man, I think this was a good conversation. We just barely kind of dipped our toe into the suck, but hopefully people can get one or two things out of this conversation today, and maybe embrace the suck for the rest of the week.
Yeah, even if all it is brushing your teeth every day and showering. Awesome, guys. Thanks for coming with us. We look forward to talking to you next week. From myself, Corey, and such, thanks very much.
Thank you.